Hey guys. If you're involved in the culture war, the deeper your understanding of what is happening, the more distant you become from your average citizen. I'm finding it difficult to relate. I'm having a hard time knowing what your average person is feeling about what is happening in the world. If they're still in their slumber, or if they have a feeling that things are off course, or if they know in the depths of their hearts that we're on the brink of destruction in virtually every Western nation. I really don't know. Everything that's going on is public knowledge, but sometimes I feel like people don't care and can't be bothered to pay attention. I don't know if what I want to talk about today is redundant, if it's as clear to other people as it is to me, but these videos are as much for me as they are for you. They help to clarify my understanding of a given situation. It seems very clear to me that Western societies are inevitably going to go in one of a few directions. One is full-blown civil war in America and in Western Europe, although I don't even know what that would look like today. Another is that in America, we deport illegal immigrants and balkanize peacefully, and in Europe, that they force out Muslims and regain control of their cultures. The third option is that we reach a peaceful solution that unifies us while our societies remain multicultural. I don't think that the latter, this peaceful unifying solution while retaining multiculturalism, is even a possibility. It would be the first time in human history that a peaceful society with a diverse population would endure, and I don't know about you, but the sum total of human experience seems like a lot of evidence to me. To understand why, we have to answer the question, what is culture? I hate to use dictionary definitions, it's so cliche, but it is helpful here because it shows what the concept of culture is generally accepted to entail. The way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. This seems self-evident, but the definition itself begs the question, what happens when multiple customs and beliefs of different groups are in conflict? Can they coexist in a given society without a struggle for a dominant culture to prevail? In the mind of a civic nationalist, the answer is yes, because they believe that all groups can consciously demote their customs and belief systems to opt into a set of principles based on intellectual freedom. But the further I go down this road, the more it becomes clear that this is likely impossible, because a success would be historically unprecedented. We, as freedom-loving, tolerant Americans, who have a spirit of revolution and built an entire nation based on principles, we can choose to do this. But other cultures will not and cannot. We're projecting our own virtues on groups of people that are not only unwilling to abandon their cultural allegiances, but are unable to. And I'm starting to believe that it's absurd to even ask people to do this, even if they live in America. There are countless examples of the failures of multiculturalism. I didn't even know where to start with this, because show me any multicultural society in the history of mankind, and I'll show you one rife with violence, conflict, and destruction, without exception. So I decided to discuss it more broadly by breaking down this infamous Harvard study on diversity. I think that although most of us have heard about it, we probably haven't all dug into the data. Robert Putnam, a Harvard professor, reluctantly released his study on increased diversity leading to diminished trust after a reporter forced his hand and before he was able to soften his findings. This actually happened. A reporter from the Financial Times pressed him about the release, and he said that it was too early because he needed to compensate for the bad effects of diversity. He was literally admitting that he planned to doctor the findings. He was shocked by what he discovered, which you can tell by the commentary accompanying the raw data, and did not want the general public to be privy to the data. But after being confronted by the Financial Times, he was left with no choice but to publish it, although he did his darndest to try to explain away the findings. He had actually risen to some level of academic celebrity with his 2000 book, Bowling Alone, in which he examined the breakdown of communities. He correctly viewed this as an urgent problem in Western societies that needed to be addressed and resolved. His personal problems began when he naively decided to examine census and survey data to find out the source of our diminishing social cohesion. Let's crack into the study, shall we? And as always, the original study is linked below. Ethnic diversity is increasing in most advanced countries, driven mostly by sharp increases in immigration. In the long run, immigration and diversity are likely to have important cultural, economic, fiscal, and developmental benefits. In the short run, however, immigration and ethnic diversity tend to reduce social solidarity and social capital. New evidence from the U.S. suggests that in ethnically diverse neighborhoods, residents of all races tend to hunker down. Trust, even in one's own race, is lower, altruism and community cooperation rarer, friends fewer. In the long run, however, successful immigrant societies have overcome such fragmentation by creating new, cross-cutting forms of social solidarity and more encompassing identities. Illustrations of becoming comfortable with diversity are drawn from the U.S. military, religious institutions, and earlier waves of American immigration. He has to be honest about his findings, which he is initially, then alludes to the long term success of immigrants. But what he's really talking about is that large immigrant communities over time coalesce and become increasingly insular as they grow. He views this as a success, but it's actually due to deeper social fragmentation on ethnic and cultural lines. He's clearly just trying to cover this up by reframing it. He does a lot of this in the study, so if you choose to read it, it's probably better just to look at and analyze the raw data without his accompanying commentary. Okay, now for the meat. I now present some initial evidence from the United States on the issue of how diversity, and by implication immigration, affects social capital. The evidence comes from a large nationwide survey, the Social Capital Community Benchmark Survey, carried out in 2000 with a total sample size of roughly 30,000. Embedded within the nationwide sample is a representative national sample of 3,000, as well as smaller samples representative of 41 very different communities across the United States, ranging from large metropolitan areas like LA, Chicago, Houston, and Boston to small towns and rural areas like Yakima, Washington, rural South Dakota, and Kanawha Valley in the mountains of West Virginia. While these 41 sites vary with respect to geographic scope, from 2 inner-city neighborhoods to several largely rural states, for the most part, they represent metropolitan areas. This is a very, very well done and comprehensive study. You can see here the diversity of the data collection sites. Different sizes, economic profiles, regions, education levels are all captured, as well as wildly varying levels of diversity. Additionally, every interview in our survey was geocoded, i.e., for the vast majority of our respondents, we know exactly where they live, and thus we know the demographic characteristics of the census tract within which they live. Thus, we know not only the race, education, income, marital status, and so on of our respondents, but also the race, education, income, marital status, and so on of their neighbors. The variability of the thousands of census tracts within which our respondents live is even greater than the variability across the 41 sample communities. Some respondents live in neighborhoods that are almost completely homogeneous, while others live in neighborhoods that are extremely diverse in every respect. This is a chart of the 41 geographical regions analyzed on a plot, with trust of neighbors on the vertical axis and index of homogeneity on the horizontal axis. As you can see, the most diverse cities, San Francisco, LA, Houston, have the least amount of trust in their neighbors. As you move towards more homogeneous areas, there is an increasing amount of trust. I changed my mind. Maybe you should read the commentary because it's kind of hilarious. At multiple points in the study, he expresses his own bafflement at the results. My favorite is his commentary on the next figure we'll discuss, which plots a given respondent's trust in his own race in diverse settings. Putnam says, Figure 5 repeats the story, but with one important difference. Now we ask about trust in people of the respondent's own race. How much do whites trust other whites, blacks other blacks, Hispanics other Hispanics, and Asians other Asians? This figure charts an entirely unexpected correlation, for it shows that in-group trust, too, is lower in more diverse settings. Whereas figures 3 and 4, the figures we just discussed, are inconsistent with contact theory, figure 5 is inconsistent with conflict theory. In other words, in more diverse settings, Americans distrust not merely people who do not look like them, but even people who do. This seems fairly obvious to me. Multicultural settings, which indisputably have more crime, force people to turn inward, which creates a general sense of distrust of any outsider, irrespective of race, because any sense of community is lost when there is too much diversity. It's every family out for themselves because there is too much crime and division to invest in the broader community. So there are no larger protections, institutional or otherwise. Putnam explains, diversity seems to trigger not in-group, out-group division, but anomie or social isolation. In colloquial language, people living in ethnically diverse settings appear to hunker down, that is, to pull in like a turtle. That is exactly what has happened to me in Seattle. Just earlier today, I was getting screamed at by a bum who was a white guy, and I was thinking, wow, I can't even walk my dogs without something like this happening. Going outside was a mistake. His race wasn't relevant because Seattle is a multicultural city with too many conflicting factions that prevents the creation of a stable, cohesive community. And when that happens, people like this bum, the dregs of society, start to crack first because there's no safety net. So far, I have limited my presentation to evidence regarding social trust, and it is true that the most impressive and substantial patterns we have so far discovered involve trust of various sorts, including even trust of shop clerks. However, a wide array of other measures of social capital and civic engagement are also negatively correlated with ethnic diversity. In areas of greater diversity, our respondents demonstrate lower confidence in local government, local leaders, and the local news media, Lower political efficacy, that is, confidence in their own influence. Lower frequency of registering to vote, but more interest in knowledge about politics and more participation in protest marches and social reform groups. Less expectation that others will cooperate to solve dilemmas of collective actions like voluntary conservation to ease a water or energy shortage. Less likelihood of working on a community project. Lower likelihood of giving to charity or volunteering. Fewer close friends and confidants. Less happiness and lower perceived quality of life. More time spent watching television, and more agreement that television is my most important form of entertainment. He really does try his best to spin this damning study by claiming that if we just push through, these effects will diminish over time and will eventually grow to love diversity. But the proof is in the pudding. His diligence was really his downfall in this, as was his hubris. He was so confident about what his findings would be. This is perhaps one of the most comprehensive, extensive, and well-constructed studies I've ever read, and no matter which way he tries to spin it, it's simply irrefutable that in every single instance, without exception, diversity drastically reduces social cohesion. This is the reason that I'm not optimistic that Western nations can unify without violence and attain cohesion as we are. It would be historically unprecedented if we were able to achieve that, and all of the masses of associated data that I reviewed, including this huge study compiled by an Ivy League leftist, reaffirm this notion. Additionally, I don't see a peaceful solution in Western nations as things are because we cannot even agree on our foundational values. The hope of the left is that the obvious failures of multiculturalism will be trumped by the unifying principles that are foundational to our nation. But what are those? I would say two very important ones are the First and the Second Amendment. The left is now openly talking about repealing the Second Amendment, and similarly have waged war on the First. The more people feel that they cannot say what they want, the more they'll start to secretly join forces and defect. This is coming. Just look at the waves that have been made by the treatment of Brittany Pettibone, Lauren Southern, and Tommy Robinson. We are no longer allowed peaceful solutions like free speech that mitigate violence, and when that happens, the makings of a violent revolt begin to brew. Westerners are kind people, polite, will let people in, give them their resources. But as soon as they start to see their rights being infringed upon, or that their survival is being threatened, things change. How on earth are we going to overcome the destruction of social cohesion in every diverse nation if we cannot agree on our foundational principles, nor speak freely about what they are and what they should be? We can't, we won't. The left has waged a culture war, shamelessly indoctrinated our children with gender dysphoria. They have disdain for the traditional family unit and a hatred of the majority, all reinforced with a healthy dose of thoroughly revised history to suit the level of cultural destruction that they see fit. Yet we're supposed to believe that we all share unifying principles about what it means to be an American that will somehow heal us as a nation? I don't buy it. For the same reasons, I'm also not very confident that we'll be able to heal our nations by reducing the burden of diversity. Think about what that would require. 30 million illegal immigrants would have to be deported in America alone. I don't think we have the stomach for that. Similarly, Europeans would have to home in on giant Muslim populations, many of which are citizens, then deport them where? Some of the most radicalized jihadists are homegrown. If we can neither sustain the damaging effects of multiculturalism nor reduce diversity through deportation of illegal immigrants, what options does that leave us? Well, the only ones I can think of are balkanization or civil war. Do people think that things are just going to spontaneously improve without any of these unpleasant futures coming to fruition? Let's take a look through history to see when things were worsening, getting more tense, more divided, then these issues just spontaneously resolved themselves. I don't know what else I can do but tell people that without resolution to these issues we've discussed, we're looking at a violent future. You can only push people so far. Look at the UK. The police will arrest you for teaching your dog to do a Nazi salute, but if you're a Pakistani Muslim that is raping and murdering white children, well, that's just too much trouble to investigate. Authorities are playing with fire. They're blindly operating under the assumption that the population in its slumber will never resort to vigilante justice, that they'll never organize, they'll never revolt, and that they'll never form their own militias. But that too would be historically unprecedented because we're animals, organisms, and we are programmed to fight for our survival. They also think that censorship is going to work, that by reducing the exposure to these ideas, that the ideas will just go away. We need our words. We need to debate, to define our nations and our shared ideologies through discussion. If we cannot do this, there is no way to mitigate what is glaringly, obviously going to be the outcome: violence. Nobody except for Muslims wants to see that future in the West, and we must fight in whatever way possible to prevent this violence. That's why free speech and gun ownership are so important. The government needs to fear the people so that they don't sell out our cultural values to achieve their own goals and satisfy their own whims, which is exactly what they've done. So in one way or another, and hopefully non-violently, we'll have to make them fear us and understand that our collective power trumps theirs. They work for us. Even if we don't get to live in the better world that we hope to, that we're trying to create, we still are obligated to fight for it our entire lives. My generation just wants to bitch about this and be all black-pilled, not have kids, and just wallow in their own self-destruction and hedonism. It's gross. But look at what our ancestors went through. Disease, war, unimaginable hardship. They had babies during all the wars, during the Depression. They persevered. And we can't because we're scared of losing our jobs, because our friends won't like us anymore. Oh no. We should all be thanking our lucky stars that we aren't getting blown up in trenches or dying of plant starvation. Grow a pair, do your job, fight for your country. Sorry guys, I'm super angry today. Thanks for watching. My next video will be part of the Skipped in School series, and that will be out in a few days. Thanks again. See you soon. Bye.